Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here and being so patient. I want to introduce you to Maggie Hamilton. Hi, Maggie.
Hello, Kim.
I want to let you guys know that we know that Maggie is an author. Of course, we read her wonderful book, and um, she's also a social researcher, right, Maggie?
Yes. Yep.
And can you tell us just a little bit about that and what that is? What do you do?
Yeah. So, look, most of my working life I've spent in book publishing, and along with working with other authors over the years, I started to do research into different aspects of human life. So, to give you an example, my first book was called What Men Don't Talk About. And that was really looking at the lives of men behind the stereotypes we have. I wanted to know what the lives of real men and boys were about. And that was one of the most moving things I've done. You know, I was interviewing men, they would cry before me. They would tell me stuff they hadn't told anybody else. Because I tried to create a very sacred, I always do when I interview, create a very sacred space with people, you know, when you're asking them, you know, often tricky questions about life and views. And from there, I ended up looking at the 21st century issues that girls are facing and boys. And then my two latest books are on one's on loneliness called When We Become Strangers. And the last one is what happens to our kids when we fail to grow up, looking at our culture, which has become very adolescent in its way of dealing with things and not wanting to step into the wisdom and the empowerment of adulthood and daring to take on the big global challenges rather than wanting either complaining or blaming or wanting others to do it. So, and this is very tied in, would you believe, with the fairies, which will surprise everybody, because my belief is that the spirit caretaker spirits of nature, which is how I see fairies, and there's not one person on the planet who has not experienced fairies, and I can tell you about that in a minute. But the reason we have this connection is because we are connected to the whole web of life, even though we've forgotten it, and it can be as strong in the city as it can be living in the country, which is another myth I like to explode. I live in Sydney in Australia, a city of millions, and, you know, I can connect here as can many. But also that they connect to us to make us whole. The connection is a holy connection, I believe. And holiness is really about what makes us whole as human beings, as spiritual beings. And the reason they do this is not because they've been put on the planet just to, you know, zhuzh us up, but because when we're whole, we can be useful to the planet. And so with it comes a responsibility to find what we're meant to be doing with our lives in way of contributing. And so for me, one of my contributions is the social research, to be able to help people understand each other, to build bridges, and to look at the bits of our contemporary society that aren't working. Because if it's not working for us, it's not working for the planet. It's certainly not working for nature, etc. So everything is connected with the fairies in quite a profound way.
Well, it sounds, I mean, it absolutely sounds fascinating. And I can't, it sounds like very, in a way, complex work, but the answers are simple. It's one of those things where it's kind of like the answers are kind of simple. They're all around us, and we have access to them.
Absolutely. And I have this belief that the universe, being so wise, never wastes energy. And that's why, even if things are intricate or complex, there is always often a simple path through, because the universe doesn't like to waste energy. Unfortunately, we humans are not quite as good at that as the universe is.
Well, and that's one thing I noticed, and I'm sure everybody here noticed in the book, the innocent and playful nature that fairies bring, but they bring out in the people who come across them, or the people that have encounters with them. And so yeah, it's a fascinating book. And I'm gonna move to our questions, because we do have a lot of them, and if I don't get to them, my people will be mad at me.
No, please do.
Well, first is my question, which is, how long did this book take to complete? Because when I first came across you and we were introduced by Kay, I think, right?
And lovely Kate.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I had her on my channel, and she's wonderful. And when she told me about a book about fairies, I thought, oh, well, it will probably be just a little book, and we'll probably. When I saw how long it was, I was like, what? Wow, where does this go? Because it was just fascinating to me. And then where this journey that you take us on, with all of the intricate things about nature, and about our kind of our spiritual selves, and all the directions that it goes. How long did it take you to complete this, and how did you know which way to go with it? Because there are a lot of ways there are a lot of paths you could have taken with with fairies. So how did you? Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because it took me a decade.
Oh my gosh.
The fairies and, the path it took me on, it only revealed itself a bit at a time. And I realize now that was so that I could integrate what I was learning. So it wasn't just a head thing. It had to become part of who I was in the world. And I don't mean that in an ego sense. I mean making it real in everyday life. And I am a Virgo, Kim. So I do I'm very plugged into making things practical for people, and also finding that simple path, because everybody leads such busy, complicated lives now. I'm very passionate about, in this area, bringing the mystical relationship with nature, really, is what we're talking about, and the spirits of the caretaker spirits of nature to the cities and towns, as well as the countryside. But the reason why I'm so passionate about the city and towns is because over 50% of the planet now lives in towns and cities. Mm. And we tend to have this very negative view that, it's a bit like if somebody works in a corporation, they're not spiritual, but we take our light with us wherever we go. And I do believe our job is to help ensoul cities, and I can explain some very practical and beautiful and simple ways to do that. So yes, 10 years, and then it took another 9 years before I found a publisher. So it was 19 years in all, and I finally, when it was published, I just asked telepathically why it had. I'd written it, and it had been sitting there for 9 years, and various publishers were going to publish it, and it didn't happen. And you know what they said to me? They said you weren't ready energetically to share this information with the world. And they were absolutely right, because there was that part of me that was thinking, oh, what will people think? I'm a social researcher, and I really love and believe in the fairies. But there was a little part of me that was kind of like, oh, am I going to... how are people going to feel? And by that stage, I was so all those who know me know that this has always been a passion of mine. But now I have no problems with it. So I actually was the 9-year hold up.
Wow, what? And so it sounds like it was definitely your own personal journey. Absolutely. As well as the journey that you take the readers on.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Um, okay, so I'm gonna move to C. She asks a question. In the first story about your grandmother
Yep.
and the vanishing path, did you
Yep.
ever question it since you were a child at the time, or did you always believe in the way you remembered it?
Look, as that little girl, just for those who mightn't have read the book, I start with my Scottish grandmother, because I was born in the north of England and was very blessed to live immersed in a fairy culture, which is of hundreds of years old. These are people who have lived so close to the earth. There is no question to them that they're living amid a much bigger ecology of other beings, which is
Mhm.
how I see fairies, basically,
Right.
amongst other things. And so I went into this meadow with my grandmother, and we had to climb over this wooden stile, as they call them in the UK. And when we came to leave, it had vanished. And my Scottish grandmother said, without any hesitation, she said, "Oh, it's the fairies playing with us. We'll just have to wait until it appears." And then it did appear, and we went home. And not a deal was made of it, because that was my childhood. That there were, places we wouldn't go
Mhm.
because it was known to be a place that was kind of sacred to the fairies, and it wasn't for us to go clumping around in those places. And so I didn't question it. And I I do, looking back at it now as, an adult, um, I believe that the fairies operate in the quantum field, in the dance of atoms, which are all fluid. And so they have the ability to work with molecules and stuff. And I do believe there's a scientific explanation to this, rather than people just go, "Oh, that's just woo-woo." There are many things that happen we can't explain, and solid isn't as solid as we think it is if we look at any of the quantum physics literature. So it was just part of a whole series of experiences growing up of wonderment, because that was the space I was in. And yet it wasn't airy fairy. These people had hard lives, and they were very matter of fact in lots of ways. But they were matter of fact about the fairy stuff as much as they were about, what you're having for dinner.
Right,
Love,
right. And,
yes,
and the, it seems like that level of just acceptance is all part of being able to access the fairies or access that
yes,
realm. There's
yes,
something about it that just is, if you, and it is kind of like, if you believe it, if you fully wholeheartedly believe it and kind of know it on some level, then you can have
yeah,
these types of interactions.
yes.
um,
And
yeah.
the skeptics would say, "Oh, you kind of imagined it." But a belief in this, or an openness, actually starts to create a bridge. And
Mm,
it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Because the universe doesn't waste energy, the fairy kingdom has enough to do trying to keep wounded nature going,
right.
and they're not put on the earth for us. That's what we've got to realize. They're not there for us, but they
Right.
communicate with us to draw us back into the web of life. So,
Mm,
and I think that's really important. And one of the key ways I've also found to connect, is, and this can be done again in the city or town as well as in the country, is to find those places in nature that you love, because you've already got a special connection going there. And then to get to know the plants and trees and bushes as individual beings, and develop a love for them. And really, it's like falling in love, or creating a friendship. You start to really see and hear that person, and a love and an empathy starts to grow. And that's when you start to come into relationship with fairies. And look, most people who have profound fairy experiences never see a thing. They don't see beings with wings. But I did mention that every person on the planet has had fairy experiences. And every time we are in nature and we're in that place where we're transported, perhaps we see a dew falling off a leaf, or a beautiful flower, or a sunset, or autumn leaves, and something inside us just expands. That is the fairy spirits of that tree or that place, the spirit of place, because that's a really important thing for us to work with, starting to create a communication with us. That's why every one of us on the planet has had that. And how much better do we feel when we've had those experiences? Fantastic.
Right. And it's that connection with the planet, with everything, just kind of the being connected to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that, I had one person and one of the comments had written, I don't really think I believe in fairies, but I felt like it's not really, it actually isn't something you have to believe in. It's just something that is.
That's right. And to experience. And really what we're talking about is, in a sense, a mystical path. And that's, again, without, sometimes I think people use that word to kind of make themselves feel special because they're feeling a bit lacking. But what we're talking about is immersing ourselves in the mystery of being here on the planet, and the mysteries that are available to us all around us in nature. And another 2 or 3 ways we know we're drawing close is when where we are becomes hyper real. And if I could just tell a quick example, Kim, I was working at that stage for Random House in Australia, and we were very lucky. Our offices were right by the Harbour Bridge. Never had such amazing offices before or since. And outside there was this huge expanse of lawn, and I rushed out from the office at lunchtime, grabbed a sandwich, and went to sit on the grass. There were loads of people around having lunch, mums with babies, dogs. So it wasn't quiet, it wasn't mystical, it was just an everyday lunchtime scene. And as I sat on the grass, it was like I plugged into the cosmic socket. Every part of me was so alive with this electricity. And I looked at the grass, and suddenly it was a green that I have never experienced before. It was like I'd always been in a world of black and white, and suddenly it was color. That was how amazing it felt. But not only that, the life energy that was flowing through me, the only way I can describe it is kind of orgasmic. And it was as if I was experiencing the life energy of every single blade of grass on that huge lawn. And I lost all sense of time and place, and just entered a place of absolute calm, ecstasy, and beauty. And then it was gone. Now, that probably lasted 30 seconds. But while I was in there, it felt timeless. And what it was doing was just allowing me to taste a new sense of aliveness, of being in the world. You take away that charge that you've had, and it kind of gives you that charge to move forward in your life. So this is what I'm talking about. Often it's very quiet, it's very unexpected, but it's also a communication that happens, and then you're not alone. And so there are times, we all have dark nights of the soul, me included. They don't stop. Times when you're feeling sad, lonely, even though you've got lots of love around you. I always go to nature now. I will go and walk in my local park, and I'll be with the trees, and the breeze and the fresh air there, because I know that will comfort my soul. And the spirits of those plants and trees and of place reach out to me to comfort me. Now, I don't see anything. I mean, I have seen things. I don't see anything, but I know, I feel the presence. And most importantly, I feel the love. And the important thing, of course, is for us to give that love back through our appreciation and gratitude. So it's quite profound, but simple.
Very, and it reminds me actually, Maggie, of, because we earlier in our book club we read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle.
Oh,
and
lovely.
I do too. I love him. So, but there's an exercise in there, and it kind of reminds me of what, on some level, of what you're talking about. And it's an exercise where you try not to label. And you go into nature and you try not to label, just say, well, that's a tree and and you try to kind of feel and experience the essence of it, rather than kind of making
Put it in a box.
Yeah, exactly. Putting it in like something you think you already know, and experience it fully.
You've got it in one. That's it.
Yeah,
And I think also, Kim, by being open to what might happen means that your bandwidth widens. So, a wider range of possibilities can meet you. And then I know one person I'd done a workshop here, and she was a young teacher, a brilliant young woman, and we've stayed in touch. And Amy, after doing that, she actually had a communication with a telegraph pole made of wood, but it was neglected. It was obviously, getting towards the stage it would be pulled down. And it communicated with her how sad it felt that it was neglected. And so she immediately emailed or texted to tell me, and she said, I just felt so privileged that it could reach out and tell me this, and to realize that I'm in a world where there's a constant communication going on. And I thought that was a very beautiful thing. So it draws us into connection, into wholeness and usefulness.
Yeah, I love that. I want to go to a question from Carol. So Carol says, I lived in Ireland for almost a year, and some believe that if you go against the fairies, for example, remove a fairy bush, etc., the fairies will cause you harm. Could you comment on this?
Look, I haven't experienced that personally, but that is my understanding. And really, it's if we don't think of fairies kind of as separate for a minute, but if we think about ourselves going into somebody else's neighborhood and pulling up a bush in their garden, or scraping their car, or walking in a neighborhood in our city that is known to be dangerous, there are consequences. So, and I think it's cause and effect. And of course, with the amount of stuff we're doing on the planet, it's a wonder any other being would want to reach out to us, because we are incredibly destructive. And we're also, because we're living in such a mundane material world now, we've lost that respect for the sacred, and that not just what we regard as sacred, but what is sacred to others. And of course, this is a huge struggle on the planet for First Nations people, including here in Australia, although we're getting much better. But there's been some terrible examples in recent times of, there was one mining company 3 years ago here, and they destroyed a cave that was 50,000 years old, and they knew it was 50,000 years old. And I mean, and of course, there's been huge consequences for that mine. But of course, that cave is gone now. So, Yes, it is, but it's not about, I don't think, the fairies being spiteful, although there are dark energies in the fairy world, just as there are everywhere. I think it's about cause and effect. So yes, I do understand that harm can happen. I haven't ever experienced it myself, but I think that's right, and that's my take on it, at least.
And it seems like if the fairies are there to remind us we're connected, we're all connected with everything. Anything we do to harm anyone or anything, we're hurting ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we're all connected.
And there's a lovely story I came across, which I popped in the book, from Findhorn, you know, that wonderful spiritual community in the north of Scotland. And when it was being set up, and I mean, the communication with fairies, the divas, who are the kind of, you know, head fairy for a species, as it were, they ended up growing 40-pound cabbages and roses that bloomed in the snow, and it was just incredible. Anyway, they're still there. But in the early days, when all this was happening, there was a deeply spiritual man who lived in Edinburgh, and he actually, called Robert Crombie, he actually used to keep a kind of dome over Findhorn of protection and love, you know, to help it thrive. And not a physical dome, obviously, an energetic dome. And one day, and he lived, as I say, in the city, and he was a scientist and broadcaster, and appeared in he was an actor, appeared in a couple of Scottish, not soapies, but dramas. So he's quite an interesting man. And anyway, one day he was going about his work, and then he got this telepathic message that the fairies were furious at Findhorn. So he rang up and he said, "What are you doing down there?" And they said, "Oh, well, you know, we decided to pull this bush and that." But he said, "Hang on a sec." He said, "Have you asked permission?" And they said, "Oh, no, we haven't." And he said, "Well, I'm here to tell you the fairies are furious and you need to communicate with them about it."
So, well, and you know, and I think that's part of it too, right? Is doing things consciously, making conscious decisions rather than just going about willy-nilly and doing what we think, what we want in the moment.
Absolutely, Kim.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I couldn't fit Elle. I think this is a question from Elle. I'm sorry, Elle, I couldn't fit your name in with the question, but she says, in the book you talk about where fairies dwell as being the in-between. Is this another name for higher consciousness? And could you expand on this concept of the in-between?
Oh, that's a lovely question. Thank you, Elle. I would suspect that the in-between is a higher vibration that would link us into higher consciousness. Mm-hmm. I suspect, I see higher consciousness as something that's very high energetically. You know, mm-hmm. In Kabbalah, the highest form of consciousness is called the Ein Sof Or, which is the limitless consciousness, which is so way beyond what we as human beings can understand. And we're right down at the bottom of the tree of life with lots to learn before we get up there. So I would say, because high consciousness obviously has levels, mm-hmm. it is a connection into that. Okay. And that's a lovely, but I'm so glad you've mentioned the in-between, because if I could just explain to those who might have got that part in the book, or haven't got the book yet, is that the in-between is kind of like the energetic crossroads, where often we can connect into the fairy realm and other possibilities, because we're in the places that are neither here nor there. So in ancient times, those were literally crossroads at roads, wells, caves. I would say in between places are vortex places. You might talk about Sedona or various other places on the planet. I think places there are definitely in between places. And they're places of great power because, in a sense, they kind of shake us up a bit and can feel a bit uncomfortable because we're not firmly rooted in, we know most of our lives we wander along and we know what we're doing and where we're going, or at least we tell ourselves we are. Sometimes then we trip up on our nose and realize perhaps we're not quite so connected in it as we thought we were at that moment. But you know what I mean? We live with certainty. Well, the in-between places are places that are not certain for us because we stand in the place of all possibilities. That's what the in-between is the bridge to, the place of all possibilities, which means good and bad, and so it means wise choice. And so the in-between places we also experience in life, I've come to realize. So, we might have a breakdown of a relationship. We might, lose our job, or, have a loss of some other kind. And then we find ourselves in a very uncomfortable place. And that is an in-between place. Because suddenly there's no certainty about our job, about our personal life or whatever. But it is actually a place of great power. And the way to navigate it is to be very still, to have times, a lot of silence if we can, and to ask for the signposts, because the natural impulse we have often is to just rush ahead, fill the void. And what I like to do is I like to ask for the signposts, and I ask to be pointed towards my highest good. Not what I'm, perhaps not necessarily what I'm desiring, although I might whisper that to the Great Spirit, hoping that might align with the higher good, but asking ultimately for what is my higher good. So in the fairy context, these are places where if we talk about our relationship with nature as a constant bridge building exercise until we build a really firm bridge, this really gives us, it's like, let's say you've only built a 20th of your bridge. This is probably going to get you to, it could get you to 60 or 70% there, or it might get you the whole way there. It gives you the opportunity for a quantum leap forward in those spaces of connection. And, because we can talk telepathically to trees and plants and stuff, and just ask them a spiritual question, and we will get often very high, wise questions back. And that's kind of entering the in-between too.
That's fascinating. And I'm going to bring the chat in a little bit because people are having questions in the chat. Marie Olga asks, what can we do to help them with climate change?
Beautiful question. Well, we talked a bit about the fairies being the spirit of. So the fairies are the living essence of a plant, a tree, a rock, in fact, of every living thing. And when I say every living thing, I mean all those things we see as inanimate, because everything is part of the dance of atoms on the planet. And so that also is a spirit of place. And this is something that First Nations Indigenous people get. And let's not forget, we were all First Nations people once. And every time I say that, I want to cry, because it reminds me of my own disconnection from the depth from what I've emerged from millennia ago, when we were all in connection with the planet, with nature. So what we can do is, obviously we can do, if we might be tasked with doing something bigger for climate change, we can do all the obvious stuff like recycling, etc., planting trees, etc. But another thing we can do is actually tend the spirit of the place where we live. the place that nurtures us. Now, I now live in an apartment in Sydney, and a group of us in the building who are very involved with ancestral healing, we have a group, and we meet every month about that. Part of that is also looking at how we can tend the spirit of this place that nourishes us. And so we try to loop in the elderly. We do stuff with the gardens. We have a huge recycling in the building, waste food, everything, stuff going to refugees. Now, you might think, well, what has this got to do with climate change? If we were all to tend the spirit of the place in which we live, draw our community back into connectedness, take care of the gardens and plants around us and continue to plant more and to take care of it, we have created a healthy ecosystem,
Right.
on the planet.
Right.
Which is a human ecosystem, our plant ecosystem, our fairy ecosystem, etc. So tending to the spirit of our place, and we might even want to have a little very sacred place there, which we can do kind of under the radar with perhaps a little group of stones or just something very tiny where we might meditate there or pray there or send love there as the focus of the vibes that can go out to that community and bless and nourish. And so if we can each take care of our own spirit of the place, we are helping with climate change because we're creating wholeness where we live.
I love that. And it's such a beautiful idea. And it's also doable. You know, I think that when we think of climate change, we think, well, the problem's so big, so what I have to do is out there. And really, it's such a great idea to put into people's heads that it can be right exactly where you are and where you live. And you're right. If everybody did that, we'd be living in a different world right now, right?
We would. And it is so nourishing, Kim, because as you start to do this stuff, and, you know, we have jumpers going off to, because it's getting cold in the northern, as you know, obviously we're finally getting some summer after months of rain. We've got jumpers, for instance, going off to Sri Lanka because, you know, the political situation's bad there. For the ladies who work in the tea plantations because they get up before dawn and it's very cold when they pick those leaves for our tea. And it's so nourishing when we were putting those bags of jumpers together because you're humbled to think these women are living in very simple circumstances to get up in the mist to pick leaves for our tea. So we're sending them these beautiful warm jumpers so that they will be warm when they're doing that. So the nourishment spreads in tiny ways across the planet. And it was just a box of jumpers, but it was one box of jumpers they wouldn't have had otherwise.
What a great story. What a great idea. And what a great, it's such a great example of the kind of things that we can do that you're right. It seems like in the big world, it seems like a small gesture, but it's meaningful. It has such meaning. Oh, that's great. So let's see. Mary says, the firsthand accounts are so compelling in the book, but the one that stuck with me was Despina and her apple tree. Did this connection arise, in your opinion, because of the fairies, the tree, or because of the spirit or consciousness of the tree itself? Or are they sort of one and the same, blending into each other?
I think it's the last one. I think it's the blending into each other. Mm-hmm. And, you know, trees are absolute gateways to higher consciousness. And for any of the your beautiful audience, Kim, or yourself, if you had done any shamanic work or just read about the shamanic paths, hopefully with somebody sensible, because there's a lot of people out there who are not remotely sensible about this work. What we do when we do shamanic travel, we travel up and down the tree of life. If we look at the Scandinavian ancient spiritual traditions, we had Yggdrasil, the tree of life. When we want something or we're concerned about something, we say touch wood. And that was because people would go to their tree in ancient times that they felt a relationship with. And of course, I don't know how many of you got to read Enid Blyton's books when they were growing up. It might have been more a British thing, but one of her books was called The Faraway Tree, and the children would venture up this vast tree and they'd meet fairy figures. And at the top of the tree was this cloud. And on top of the cloud, different worlds would come and go. And sometimes they'd get stuck in a world that wasn't so good for them, etc.
Right.
But in a sense, what Enid Blyton didn't realize when she was writing that almost 100 years ago, she was talking about the shamanic experience. Because, in the shamanic experience, you experience different places, different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
the tree, the consciousness of trees do blend with our own experience.
right.
They come to meet us as well. So I do think it's both.
Right. And this next question has a story with it that I do want to share with you first. It's just kind of a little thing, but I thought you kind of need the context. So so this is from Jean, and she says, I am waiting to purchase a dilapidated property where we plan to build our forever home. There are a few old growth trees that I will need to cut down that are too close to the home we will build. It's not safe for big storms on the East Coast. I will prune and wire cable the others for hurricanes. If I promise the elementals that I will plant more trees, maybe in the Amazon by proxy or locally, and flowering trees on my property, maybe some with fruit trees, will this be a fair exchange? I was going to go and sit and try to explain this to them, but I don't want to offend them in any way. I love the earth and have created many beautiful gardens where I lived, and I plan to do the same on this property. I also plan to leave part of it wild for them. Maybe add some wildflowers too. Also nectar plants for bees and butterflies. A further question is, how do I negotiate with them for the most benevolent outcome for all?
Well, that's beautiful. And I think sometimes we don't want to talk to the fairies because we don't want to hear what, their answer might not be quite what we were hoping for. I think there's also that part of us that, we've done all this one, and it's beautiful what you're suggesting there. The reason I say sit with them and talk to them is they know this already.
Right.
But they know your plans already in great detail. But also, they might come up with solutions that blow your mind, that you haven't even thought of. One of the things that immediately comes to mind for me with those old growth trees is, are there seeds or cones or whatever that you can take and pot?
What a good idea.
So that, that life, the mother tree, those wonderful books we've read about mother trees, that's an immediate suggestion from me. But really, it is about talking to the fairies, because they are the keepers of that place, and they've been the keepers of that place through time. and this is your sacred duty now, and do it with an open heart, and I think you'll be surprised at what they might suggest for you. That I mean, for one thing, they might not need you to do all those things. They might say, you know what, you're going to wear yourself out trying to compensate, and we love the fact you're doing that, but really you only need to do A, B, or C. I mean, I don't know what they're going to say.
Right.
My hotline isn't that good, but just sit with them, just sit in meditation, sit and talk to those trees telepathically that have to go, the spirit of those trees, and explain it. Ask for the forgiveness for that, so that you don't you don't bear that burden going forward. And how might you go forward with this? Because they might even suggest a better way of removing them, or I mean, there is so much knowledge we have and wisdom we have access to when we sit in silence with it. So bless you for caring.
I was going to say that I loved that, because I felt like too that part of it sounds like, and you can talk about this, but I think it sounds like part of this is intention as well, and her intention is not negative or bad or to take away or to destroy. It really is to try to do things in the most respectful and caring way possible. And so I think that has to count for something, right? Because she's not just going, just destroying everything because she wants to have a nice house. And she's really, really thoughtful about this.
And what I also love about it is that she is already a tender of the spirit of place, which is what we were talking about earlier. This is what we're talking about when we're tending the spirit of place. And let's not forget that sooner or later, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. This is the way for all of us, as we are absorbed back into, the vast cosmic journey, to reappear. Who knows? I mean, I have ideas, but it could be completely wrong. But we will always remain the dance of atoms. Right. And nature gets that as well, far more so than we do.
Right. That constant recycling, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see where we are. Okay. I thought this was a good question. Sarah asks, in your book, we come across many personalities among the fairies. Some are sort of mischievous, some are loving, some playful. Is it the place that determines the personality or the people?
Oh, lovely question, Sarah. That's I think there are two things. What I've learned through, all the work I've done on the book, and of course, this is it's a lifetime journey for me, of understanding, is that the fairies are somebody described it to me, and I put in the book, a vast ecology, of many different types of beings. So, it's like humans. Some people, are naturally, dare I say, more easily lovable than others initially, when we meet them. And some people are prickly and we kind of, step back a bit. So I think there is that with the nature of them. But I also think it's how we interact with them, and also the experience they've had previously. And Robert Crombie, who I mentioned previously in relation to Spindhorn, and I've included this in the book, he tells of a story where he goes to this dell in Scotland, and he meets the king of the fairies there, or the elves, I think, and they don't want to have anything to do with him. They are molten angry. And he's thinking, well, I've just arrived here and I'm respectful and all this. But then he sits and listens to their pain at what was being done. And this is like, almost 100 years ago, I think that experience would have taken place. And then everything calmed down and they came into a place of love together. And he really his heart, Rock's heart opened to what these beings were telling him, to understand their pain. And I thought that was such a profound thing. I had to put it in the book. So I think it's a collection of where we're up to, experiences in the past, if you like, if I can say the DNA of that particular, for want of a better expression, that spirit of nature. So it's a complex thing. But however we find them, it's like human beings. You know, we can warm up a relationship, and we do that with love and just like we would on a human level. Love, respect, demonstrating that we're genuine about what we say we're doing, because of course as humans we're very good at saying stuff and not following through, and that's something the fairies are very conscious of, that we don't, you know, we're not keeping our word. And fairy tales are full of that, you know, beyond the superficial stories. You start to get the fairy lore, that one's word is one bond, etc. Yes, great questions.
I really like that question as well. And so T asks, in the story about the girl who went missing, playing with the fairies because she was unaware of time, can you explain if she actually disappeared into another dimension, or and can humans, is it a place humans can visit? I think that it's that Tia is asking if she actually literally disappeared, or if it was more her state of mind that she you know, in her imagination and her moving into this realm with the fairies, that she just, in her, you know,
she did vanish because they were looking for her from memory for a couple of days.
Oh my God.
But from her perspective, and this happens a lot with people, and this is really fascinating. I'm so pleased you've asked this question. She didn't leave the space she was in. She experienced it as a higher vibration. How about that?
So now, she was there, but she couldn't be seen. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And that's why most fairy folk, I think we don't see them. That's actually, while I haven't really, you know, gone into the UFO thing a great deal, but I know now NASA and people, organizations are putting money into try and seeing aliens. Right. And Spirit has said to me, you know, they're around us. They just don't want to see us because they don't particularly care for how we, you know, behaving on this planet and space junk around the planet. So if I can explain that, I'm so glad you've asked this question, because one of my dear friends who I mentioned in the book, Bob Crombie, he has worked in nature all his life, and particularly the Swan Park in the south of Sydney, very dense kind of wilderness, beautiful. And he knows the sacred places there, the vortexes, all sorts of stuff. And there are places, he takes people on night walks, like at midnight, into the park, where you do experience other dimensions. And what is interesting is that you can tell this is going to happen because weather events happen. This is what Bob says, and I have seen it, where two events shouldn't happen together. So it's windy or breezy, but the mist is descending. Now, you don't have mist with breeze because breeze blows mist away. So now I haven't experienced this next bit, but I have interviewed a number of people who've been with Bob who have, scientists, mums and dads, artists, variety of people from all walks of life. And they talk about suddenly they can feel that electricity. That's one sign, when you can feel that electricity, like I did when I was sitting on the grass, having that rather electrifying lunch.
Right.
So you can feel the vibe change, and the colors changed in this place. And they change to, like, you know, people who wear khaki outfits, like soldiers and other people like to wear it as a fashion thing. a mottled world was how they described it. Everything, so the same trees, the same bushes, the same path was there, but suddenly it's mottled. And then they start to see little figures who very much mirrored the plants and flowers there. And because Australia is a very dry land, it often looks like kind of spiky nuts and things like that. Anyway, and then it changed again, and it was a sylvan world. And they said there was actually fairy lights strung up. There were fires and little figures sitting around fires talking and going about their business. And they weren't at all fazed by the humans because they don't expect us to see them.
Right.
And this blew my socks off when I found this out. And I have another account in the book from somebody else who had a vineyard in the States, and one of her experiences there in the vineyard where she was in exactly the same place and ended up in a golden version of that, with all the vibratory stuff, etc., happening.
Right.
So this is really an exciting question because we always think fairyland is somewhere different. And it is vibrationally, but not necessarily totally geographically, if that makes sense. So you're still you're still standing on the same path looking at this or wherever it's happening.
Right.
But the vibrations have lifted that have enabled your sight to experience that at a new level. Now, in the US, one of my favorite places is the Great Southwestern Deserts, which is one of the most sacred places on the planet, I believe. And, you know, I've been a few times and could always go again. And there we have the Pueblo peoples, the Anasazi, in the cliff dwelling, the beautiful cliffs or mesas.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds of years ago, these Native American Pueblo people built like villages in the cliff walls because for safety reasons, because of other tribes and what have you. Hundreds of feet up from the ground. You've got whole villages carved into the clay there. And across hundreds of miles, these Pueblo peoples disappeared at the same time. Now, if you go on an everyday person's, you know, which I did the first time, guided tour, because you can't, obviously, you're not allowed to go by yourself because, you know, people could fall off the cliff if they're not careful. Right. They say, oh, there was a drought somewhere and kind of people, but there's no kind of accounts, and they said everybody had to go, but nobody at that time had drifts of people arriving somewhere else, if you see what I mean. Right. You listen to the Anasazi explanation, and they say those people, and they were deeply spiritual peoples, they say they're still there, they're living in a high vibration. Now, when I heard that at the time, I thought that was a bit, I couldn't get my head around it. You know, I didn't disbelieve it because I really respected them, and I could feel these were highly sacred places we were visiting, but I couldn't get my head around it. But since my fairy research and talking to Bob and others, I totally get what they're saying now. They're there, they're in a different vibration, which in a sense is a different dimension, I suppose. Right. But it's not somewhere else other, you know, like we feel if we go to contact fairyland, it's kind of somewhere way away. Right. Actually where we are. So when we're tending the spirit of place, we're tending the vibrational possibilities of everybody who's living there, including all the beings that we can't access necessarily. Exciting stuff.
It is. Well, it's to me, it's so believable because we really do get lost in this dimension. We really do get lost in our everyday drama, and you know, whatever's right, you know, kind of right in front of us. That's kind of where we most of us live most of the time. And so you're out, and you're definitely speaking our language.
Lovely, lovely. And I feel this is, again, this all has very practical possibilities, because it means that when we're tending spirit of the place where we live, and inevitably there are dramas and disasters happen and all this sort of stuff, we can access the higher possibilities of those other beings that are dwelling in this space to help give us a solution, point the way forward. So we're not alone in this.
Right. I love that. I will make that. Well, I have two last questions, but
Yes.
Are you able to stay just over an hour? Okay.
Absolutely.
This conversation, and I know people are loving this in the chat. So Craig, let me just put this up real quick. Craig Dixon says, "I'm from the Navajo tribe.
Oh.
You must treat the area with the utmost respect, otherwise it can affect you in a negative way." So I think he's just confirming what you were talking about, that kind of oneness with the earth. And
yes, and Craig is so right. And Craig, I've visited your tribal lands, and they are so utterly sacred. It is deeply humbling to be in the places that you have cared for, your beautiful people have cared for millennia, and I want to honor that. And what Craig said is absolutely right. This is, I feel one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I feel the whole fairy thing has become so candy floss. And when it's on that level and it's just sparkly kind of tinkly things, it actually it denies us entry into the depth of wisdom and beauty and healing and learning possibilities that we have access to. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to be moved on from that, but also to feel, doesn't matter where you live, you can honor and nourish spirit of place.
Right. So yeah, thank you, Craig. And
thanks, Craig.
Yeah. And BR asks, at the end, you say, quote, "Fairies help you see the fragility and utter preciousness of life," end quote. Is that the basis of their soul purpose?
Wow. These are fantastic questions. I do think it is. I think it is. And this to me is all part of entering this mystic world with our feet very much firmly planted on the ground, and not trying to have psychic experiences or this experience or that, but just entering into the beauty and intricacy of what we are part of. And I do believe that's right. That is their sole purpose. Beautifully put. And, I think what this does is it not only makes us whole and useful, it makes us a safe person to be around, because people can trust us to be kind, to be grateful, respectful. We're not always going to get it right, but largely, and that's what the world needs now on a human level. Of course, we need to take care of this beautiful planet of ours. And, we've really got to get moving with this. And we are, but we just have to keep going with that. But also with each other, we have to come to that place of depth of wisdom and silence inside ourselves, that soul connection within and with all living things, so that just our presence can be a blessing to others. We might sit on a bus and have a 2-minute conversation with an elderly person, or, so that when we don't have to do it as in a conscious way of trying to be, that do-goody thing can be so boring, but just being deeply authentic and loving and interested and curious.
Right.
And that is healing for others, even if they only come into contact with that energy that we carry. through the grace of the divine, the Great Spirit. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And our last question, can you talk about your own visit with the fairies, and has your relationship to that realm changed since you wrote the book?
Yeah, it's what it is an ever deepening kind of learning, I guess, about. And, you know, as I said at the beginning, what I find with the fairies is they give me a little thread and then there's nothing more until I've really sat with it and integrated it. And that might take 8 months or 10 months. They're not in a hurry because they really want us to, I mean, on one level, you know, there's an urgency on the planet, but they really want us to get this in a profound way. And I guess what it's done for me is it's given me a depth of belonging on the planet that I never thought possible, that I see this planet, the whole of my planet, you know, okay, I live in Australia, but wherever I go, I was lucky enough to go to Alaska recently, and being out there in those wilderness places was so sacred. And to me, I feel just as part of it as I do, you know, my own backyard, and also with other people's, you know, seeing different flora and fauna. It's just such a great sense of belonging. And of course, that knowing that we have access to wisdom beyond anything we could comprehend. It's a deeply satisfying thing. Doesn't mean to say we're not going to have the dark nights of the soul, because that tends to be our greatest learning. And, you know, I continue to have them, as do we all. And it's not the universe punishing us. It's the universe helping us grow. But to know that we're not alone in this. And I have to say, the spirit of place is something I've been working with more recently in the last 2 or 3 years. And, you know, again, our First Nations people like Craig, they get this stuff. They totally get it. There's something nourishing about nourishing those around us and the land. We call it country here in Australia. Our Aboriginal, our First Nations people call it country. And the first thing they do is, if you go to different places, they welcome you to country, to the spirit of their place. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And Jean would like to know, do you have fairies in your apartment?
We do. I have to tell you, Jean, growing things on a balcony is a huge challenge, and some things flourish and some things don't. And I'm always talking to the fairies about it. And I can hear them laughing because, you know, I have to be honest, 50% of the things that we plant and try to nourish seem to die on us. But, you know, it is that whole balcony thing, which is a bit of a challenge. But I live in a very green part of Sydney, so I'm out there. I feel the fairies more in all the parks around me, and we've got a very green city with lots of very old trees around us, and that's where I feel the fairies the most. And if I could just mention, Kim, on YouTube, I have a couple of little clips I've done on more about connecting with fairies, and also a second one on trees. If you just Google me and fairies and trees, that might be useful to everybody for a few more ways to work with fairy folk.
Oh, great. And I will, if you send those links to me, I'll put them in the link for this chat.
Oh,
and
thank you so much.
Yeah, because I think they would love that. And so Maggie, I just have to tell you that my club, the IntuitClub, has heard this story before, but I thought you'd find it really interesting. So I do a lot of orb work, where I work with orbs, and I'll call them in.
Wonderful.
But one night I was, I don't know why I think I had read something about fairies that day or something. And I asked the orbs, and they kind of, you know, they're circles, so they're kind of go around, and I asked them, can you show me a fairy energy? And they all of a sudden got super tiny and started kind of buzzing around, almost like little bees.
Oh,
And there
how
were just tons of them, and they
beautiful.
were flying towards me and around me, and it was the most fascinating thing. But I shared that with my club, and they just thought that was
And a
a
number of
crazy.
people, they describe their fairy experiences as them being like little bees.
Yeah, so there is
How
a
marvelous.
fairy energy.
Yeah, and
I've seen it.
fairies can manifest physically to us. But
Yes,
I think if we stop, sometimes we get so caught up on wanting to see this little winged figure, we
right.
miss all the other prompts we're getting. But definitely some people do, of course,
Yeah.
up to kind of Yeti figures, which I've
Yes.
mentioned in the book. There's all sorts.
Right.
It's a big kingdom out there of fairies, but I love that. How wonderful.
Yeah, isn't that funny? So, well, thank you so much. I mean, Maggie, this has been such a fun and just I think a really, somebody said it was a very practical conversation. And I
Oh,
thought, for
lovely.
talking about fairies, it really, really is because, you know, it is, it's about the earth and about our connection to it and connection to each other. Yeah, I really thank you for coming. And I wanted to just let you know, people, Deanna says, I'm so appreciative for this conversation. Thank you, Kim and Maggie, and to all the thoughtful members. So
Bless
I'll
you
leave you with
all.
that.
And
All right.
particularly you, Kim, for making this possible for us across the world. Aren't we blessed?
You're so welcome. It's my pleasure. And yes, absolutely. We have, our community, we join with other communities, and it's just beautiful because I think people really need each other right now.
Yes,
But we talk about
absolutely.
things like this a lot. So I really, really thank you for coming. And Carol says, thank you, Kim and Maggie.
Oh,
And let's see, thanks, a great talk. And Jean says, such a sweet conversation. Thank you so much. So
oh.
thank you again, Maggie. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you,
It's
Intuit
made
Club.
my day.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Intuit Club, for coming and for participating. Yeah, what a great book. And it's going to be one of my go-tos. I think I'll be going back to it again and again and again.
Oh,
So
bless you. Well, go well, all of you. And Kim, just huge blessings for holding this space for the rest of us, darling.
thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much. My
you.
pleasure. My pleasure. Good night, everybody, or bye, everybody, whatever time zone you're in. I'm going to sleep, but you guys enjoy your day. All
Thank
right.
you. Bye.